so that's on. Yeah. All right. So we are on live right now. And that is good. Let me move this out of the way. I should put you down here so I'm not looking away from the camera. And then put this down. Okay. Perfect. All right. So how do I Dr. Robert Yoho, or you're no longer a doctor, are you? So how would I address you? How would you like to be addressed? Let's take that route. Uh-oh. You can't hear me. Ah, I see. I see what's happening. All right, let's put you in on.
There you go. Now you can hear me, right?
Yes.
Okay, so I got your question. The answer to that question is call me Dr. Yoho, and then I will correct you and say, you don't have to doctor me. I've signed out of the medical profession. Just call me Robert. So just go ahead and be respectful the first time you address me, and then I'll say, you don't have to say that, Greg. I'm no longer with the established thing. Just call me Robert.
Okay. Sorry about that. I forgot you.
No,
I had
no
to
worries.
assign you. I'm like, wait.
No,
what's
no,
going
that's
on?
totally cool. Whatever.
Okay. Well, Robert, give us a little snapshot of your background and tell us what your message is towards the world.
I'm 67 years old. I've had a complete career in medicine, including initially becoming an emergency physician, then practicing in the emergency room, then transitioning into family practice, and finally, for the last bulk of my career, 30 plus years, doing cosmetic surgery, doing breast augmentation, liposuction, facelifts, and so on. My snapshot is that over the last several years of my career, I had a real awakening, and I started reading general medicine, and I became concerned about what I eventually thought of as medical corruption. I had two patients die in my office within 6 month period, and it was intensely disturbing, and it rewrote my psychology. And I was nearing a retirement anyway, so I started reading and writing, and eventually put together these two books, which took 4 years. So the medical practice is a mess. Everyone knows that. Everybody knows there's something wrong, but understanding just what's going on, the doctors don't even get it. Some of us, it's like the old Indian story about trying to figure out what an elephant is. Some people might hold on to the elephant's toenail. Some might hold on to the elephant's nose or trunk, and they only perceive that part of it. For example, some general internists understand that cardiology has gone off the rails, that angioplasty basically doesn't work very well, if at all. And most of them have some clue that cardiac surgery for coronary artery disease doesn't work either. And I can describe those in detail later, or you can read my book. They're not maybe the easiest way to understand where medicine has gone wrong.
Sure.
We all understand. You want me to ramble on here? Or do you
No,
want to ask some more questions?
I'd rather
Okay,
not.
go ahead.
Yes,
No
I
worries.
think that's good. So you are a whistleblower.
I'm a whistleblower. I'm a healthcare whistleblower.
Okay, so let's rewind a little bit. You had two patients die in your office. Can you share anything you can share that's okay for the public, and caused by what exactly?
Well, any cosmetic surgeon generally has one fatality during their career. And I had two in a relatively short period of time, but one of them was under the care or the operation of another surgeon. So I really only count mine as one. The circumstances of this case, I don't think it's going to be valuable to discuss in detail. You can point fingers or assign blame or assign causes, but it's a bit technical for this discussion. And suffice it to say that I did my best, and the patient still had an unexpected fatality. In cosmetic surgery, you're not supposed to have fatalities, and nobody understands them. But when you operate on thousands of patients, there are some people who are due to die the next day, or they're very unhealthy, or circumstances during the surgery cause a fatality. So it's just a statistical inevitability if you've done 10,000 cosmetic cases like I have. The fatality rate overall for cosmetic surgery, for certain kinds of cosmetic surgery, is as high as 1 in a couple thousand. For tummy tucks, that's quite hazardous. For liposuction, it's much lower. It might be 1 in 25,000. But anyway, that's the
Do
long and
you
the short
need
of
to
it. That's
have
maybe too
a
convoluted.
specialty? Do you have to be certified to do liposuction?
Well, I passed the boards in cosmetic surgery, so I am heavily qualified based on my experience. And at the time I'd had these things, was I was at the end of my career, and my experience was comprehensive, and my knowledge base was comprehensive.
So, but you did obtain a certification that says that you are allowed to do this, and you're not just a regular doctor that's performing these surgeries.
Of course, I'd been involved in that specialty for 3+ decades, and my certifications were. I've got a 20-page curriculum vitae.
Oh, can you explain what that means?
That's a resume.
Okay.
I've got a 20-page resume. Anyway, go ahead.
All right.
This
So
is a little off topic.
no, I want to
Go
just
ahead.
paint the picture because
Sure.
I came across some articles online, and I just wanted to understand because it says cosmetic surgeon license suspended after 2 patients died. So if I can put
Yeah.
that on here.
No, that's good. Yeah, the story is essentially that
On this
after
one.
there's any adverse consequence, these medical boards they they basically go after you, and they are required after any bad consequence to um, investigate. And
Hmm.
so I underwent their investigation. I never did the essentially the trial, and I compromised for a probationary period, and I resigned my license within um, a couple of years of that occurring, rather
Okay.
because I was due to retire.
Okay. So if you can just explain this, because I want to make sure that everything is clear and there's no misunderstanding when people look you up. So that it's if you can see that, okay, make sure that's out of the way. All right. So this is an article right here that I came across in 2017. If you can just give me the understanding of what they're saying about you and with your actions.
Well, I think we've gone into this enough. I don't think we have to go into it much more. The state medical boards are required to investigate. They're pretty draconian about their investigations. My reputation is virtually unsullied before this time period, and when I had checked out of medicine under this cloud of this cloud of censure, but it's sort of an inevitable consequence of having a fatality in your office. And one of these wasn't mine; was another physician. No one could really understand why I was investigated for that one,
Mm-hmm.
but it was in my surgical center.
Okay. All right. And I don't know where I want to take this, but let's continue a little forward. And your message is to look at the corruption. Now, what exactly is corrupted in the medical field? Because that is a large dumpster worth of corruption, and I want to figure out exactly where you focused at.
Well, other physicians and commentators have written about sectors of this thing, and like I
Mm-hmm.
say, they understand the elephant's toenail or something. But I reviewed the whole thing, and all of my work was entirely derivative, Greg. It
Mm-hmm.
wasn't anything I made up. So sort of starting at the top, the insurance industry takes off 20% of the entire gross revenues of healthcare, which are approaching $4 trillion a year. It's almost 20% of our gross domestic product. This
Mm-hmm.
is twice per capita or twice per person what other developed countries spend on healthcare. They spend 10%, and Singapore gets by with about 5%, and they have
Mm-hmm.
excellent care. And the other part of the puzzle is that about 50% of what we're doing is wrong. It's not, it doesn't work, or it's actually harmful to the patients. And that's well known academically, too. That's not something you can quibble about. So we've got this system that overtreats and doesn't treat well and is twice as expensive as the rest of the world. Warren Buffett called it the tapeworm of the American economy because we have to figure out something to do with this or it's going to eat us all. The growth of healthcare is something like 17% a year, far above the inflation growth. So this thing it's a big problem. The corruption extends into big pharma, which has more criminal settlements than any industry in history, more criminal settlements by federal prosecutors.
Mm-hmm.
So those guys basically spend all this money doing these studies that they essentially ruin with fake statistics, and they're allowed to conceal half they're allowed to conceal their studies, which can make the ones that they don't conceal look pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
For example, the human papillomavirus vaccine, they concealed half the studies, and the vaccine was abandoned by Japan, which arguably has as good a public health system as we do. Only 1% of Japanese take the HPV vaccine, but I'll bet you've had it in your age group. I'm sure you've had it. And virtually all of us, all of our kids are forced to take this thing, which which has not been proven to be effective. And if there's one thing I learned in the course of studying all this stuff, it was that small numbers and big claims are something that you have to realize is probably just nonsense. And if you don't understand the reasoning because it's too complicated, that likely means somebody is lying to you for a commercial purpose. So the new golden rule, of course, is those with the gold make the rules. And that's what we're seeing here with Big Pharma. I can go on about the individual specialties corruptions if you'd like.
No, not yet. Let's rewind a little bit. How did you uncover this information with the insurance and what they're doing?
Well, this is a freely available information, and I went from one source to another and Googled around, and it's not the narrative, the sort of propaganda narrative that we've been hearing, and as you may have sort of discovered, a lot of the common narratives are commercial interests expressing attempts to profit on whatever is going on. The FDA, there are many books about the FDA and how problematic it is. It's a $5 billion effort to control an industry that
Mm-hmm.
is something like, I mean, it's in the trillions, and it's incapable of doing it. And in the early 2000s, a law was passed that says their funding would be primarily from user fees, which are direct payments from the pharmaceutical companies to the FDA. So many observers felt that this turned the FDA into believing these companies were clients rather than something to be regulated. So, you know,
Yeah.
it's a mess of economic interests.
Okay.
And if you have you read Cialdini's Influence book, that's an important
No, not
thing for
yet.
your readers to
Yeah.
look at because that shows that any exchange of value poisons the well. In other words, if you accept money or even a meal from someone, you cannot be objective about what they're up to. You get it? In other words, the pharma companies come into the doctor's office, serve us dinner, and they give us free samples and do all these things for us. And it basically destroys our ability to be objective and do what we're supposed to do, which is focus on patient outcomes and do the best thing for our patients. One of the most egregious examples of this is oncology, cancer therapy, where over half, perhaps 75% of these guys' incomes is from retailing chemotherapy drugs. Now, if you were a doctor and I was a doctor and I told you, here's a product or a medication, sell this, and you can keep 25% or 20%.
Mm-hmm.
That's a federal crime called capping, and we'd both go to jail if we were caught. But there's an exception for these pharmaceutical companies, and they're allowed to do this, and they've basically got the oncologists or the cancer doctors completely bought out. It's not
Mm-hmm.
like they give them meals or anything like that. And the story gets worse. They are incentivized by the milligram. In other words, they're incentivized to use larger doses because they get paid more for larger doses. Now, of course, doctors are trained in ethics, and we're one of the most highly skilled and best trained groups of large groups in America. But it's impossible to ignore influences like this. And for that reason and others, perhaps more importantly, oncology is almost completely ineffective. There are about 5 or 6 entities or diseases that can be effectively treated: testicular cancer, some lymphomas and leukemias, and so on. But most of it, and maybe 95% of it, the only improvement with all that chemotherapy and all that toxic stuff is 2 months of improved survival. And this is recently published information. This is
Mm-hmm.
that's not something that's controversial.
So you got a lot of information to unpack there. One, were you one of those doctors that were influenced to prescribe different medications than you thought were necessary?
Greg, I am like Rip Van Winkle. I was in a side bywater of medicine. I was doing cosmetic surgery for the bulk of my career. Now, we did have a few commercial interests. We bought breast implants and we
Mm-hmm.
bought Botox and so on. And those companies are aggressive, and they did their best to buy our attention with all kinds of perks. But we weren't in a field like psychiatry, which is probably the most heavily influenced field, or oncology, which, to my view, is set up in such a way so that objectivity is impossible. Or orthopedics, which they have enormously close ties with the implant manufacturers. There's many ways money exchange hands there. I mean, so I woke up because of these events in my medical career, and I
Mm-hmm.
started looking around, and I didn't like what I saw, and it took me at least 2 years to figure out, and another year to write this
Mm-hmm.
book and get it down to the level where I thought everyone could understand it.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, there's thousands of books published every day on Amazon, and getting
Mm-hmm.
attention for this is almost, it seems like almost impossible. I'm obscure. I'm
Yeah.
obscure. I've sold less than 1,000 copies so far.
Well, see, what I'm gathering is I feel like maybe you were one of those doctors that were influenced and that were utilizing alternatives to gain for financial gain, but then you woke up and realized that it's the wrong path and that you want to do better.
Craig, it is true that religious converts are sometimes the most avid proselytizers. But I was in a cash pay business, right? And the biggest conflict of interest in medicine is fee for service insurance reimbursement, which means
Mm-hmm.
the doctor gets paid for doing something. Particularly, the surgeons get paid for operating. So they have a conflict, and which is a nice way to say it, uh, and they are incentivized to do all kinds of things. Now, in my field, it was entirely paid by the patients. So,
Mm-hmm.
if I had any adverse incentives, it was to um, perhaps do more surgery than was indicated. But it's an entirely cosmetic surgery is entirely voluntary, and this isn't much of a problem. I mean, overselling perhaps is a problem in cosmetic surgery, and the people with the slickest offices, the most advertising, and so on, maybe they are overselling what they do and trying to get people to put in more breast implants than possible. But the thing about cosmetic surgery is it's entirely voluntary, and the people, primarily women who are interested, they pretty much know what they want when they come in, and they So I don't think that it was a big. Cosmetic surgery is one of the smallest commercially influenced areas in medicine,
Okay. Can
and
you
there's
walk us
plenty of
through
other
that
ones. Yeah.
process on how people were to, because I'm very unfamiliar, just unqualified to understand this, but for me and for everybody else, like what is the process for someone who wants to do cosmetic surgery, and then and then what's your position and what you do, and how do you ensure everything happens accordingly?
Well, instead of that, let's talk about the conflicts in a more obvious field like cardiac surgery. Right? In cardiac surgery, these guys have patients who are pre-selected with chest pain or some other problem, and they have a magic bullet, which is coronary artery bypass grafting. But the statistics in their studies have shown that there are only one narrow subgroup of perhaps.
So I came across this, and I just wanted to make sure. Please do not believe the bias. So I don't know who would write this review, but I mean, is that normal? Is this like a normal thing that's been happening?
Well, I can't read the review, but you can see down below there's a 5-star review or a 6-star review. So anyone that has an online presence has um, adverse reviews. I mean, it doesn't. There's no doubt about that. And they also have, uh,
Well,
competitors.
yeah, it
Listen to me.
says
They
Dr.
also
Yoho
have
never
competitor.
had my
Listen to me.
chart
Listen to
and
me.
no idea of how the surgery was performed until I corrected him. So I just want to understand if that's a normal thing that doctors are doing, because right now, because we're blowing the whistle on the healthcare industry. That's right. So how do we arm ourselves so we can survive what's happening right now? Because it's the most
Well,
largest and most corrupt industry in America, right?
yeah, I think the best. Look, it's a problem, and that review could have easily been written by a competitor, and that's that's what they do. I mean, it's a sad deal. My reviews were almost universally positive during the time that I practiced.
Which you're right. I
Um,
have come across those.
yeah,
I'm not here to
but
bash you. I'm
here's how
here
we
just to get to the
protect ourselves.
truth.
I understand. Here's how we protect Here's how we protect ourselves.
Sure.
First of all, the economic interests involved in medicine are so unbelievably powerful. The healthcare is the size of the federal government. Okay, so the federal government tax revenues are less than 4 trillion. Right now, the size of the federal government, of course, is bigger than this.
Hmm.
Is that a vapor? Is that a vape?
Yes, that is a vape. I definitely
Okay, that's
I
not
enjoy
good
it.
for you, dude.
Yeah.
You might want to consider reading about that. But I think that's about the bad thing in vapes is um, nicotine, and
Yes.
nicotine is primarily responsible. So if that one has nicotine,
Oh,
it's not good
definitely
for you.
does. Oh, definitely.
Okay, so all right,
What about
so it keeps
the
you
coronavirus? Should we
stimulated a little
avoid
bit.
that?
Well, now your question is, do we avoid the coronavirus?
Yeah. How do we avoid that, and also getting the shots? Is that any helpful for us from not catching it?
Well, now here's how I watched the whole thing develop just like you did, and
Hmm.
I was seeing it through my lens of my medical corruption background, and I knew that the only robust measure of the coronavirus disease was fatalities, right?
Yes.
All these other, yeah, from the start, I knew that. And I followed the fatalities carefully on various websites, and I saw them go up, and then I saw them start to go down, and then I saw the figures disappear. So I quickly understood that the narratives on the coronavirus were incorrect. I also understood that Big Pharma, who had produced the vaccines, were liars, and they had undergone all these criminal allegations that they've settled, billions of dollars every single year, Greg. And so I had my doubts from the start. And the last thing I understood was I understood that the vaccines they had produced over the last 20 years were completely ineffective. In other words, the flu vaccine, you can read about that on CochraneReviews.com. And
Okay.
that's the most respected source in medicine. The flu vaccine does not decrease the chance of pneumonia or all the other stuff that they purport it to do, which the flu is not a very consequential disease, but it doesn't help the chance of pneumonia. They've got this other thing called Tamiflu, which doesn't work either, and that's all been refuted. And I mentioned already the HPV vaccine, which was the other vaccine that they came up with in the last 20 years. And this doesn't work. At least Japan doesn't think it works at all, because they recognize that the companies threw out half the studies. And because
Wow.
of that, they threw out the vaccine from Japan, but it's still being given here. So I knew that big pharma was a real problem, and I had heavy doubts about a vaccine. And then when I read this idea that it was 95% efficacious, I just laughed because,
Mm.
and of course, now we're realizing that that was a complete lie. That it's not very efficacious. It's not really a vaccine. It doesn't prevent subsequent cases. 70% of the new cases are in previously vaccinated people, and it does not confer immunity, while the getting the disease completely confers immunity. The last part of the puzzle, which is the most sickening thing to me, is we have two robust treatments for COVID, right? We've got ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine, both of which are drugs which are off patent, they're cheap, and they're not toxic at all. We give Plaquenil, which is hydroxychloroquine, to arthritic patients every day for years. But these things are being covered up, they're being censored by big tech, and it's an unbelievable scene. The other thing that helps, in all likelihood, is taking vitamin D. And see, vitamin D, we have these enormous studies from Scandinavia, 250,000 patients, and the ones with higher D levels have much fewer serious health consequences. They're in better shape. Now, this does not prove that giving D prevents COVID, right? But it's very suggestive, and D is cheap. Everyone should take that.
Mm. Okay. So Lysol doesn't work.
Well, I don't want to specifically address Lysol. I'm not familiar with,
Yeah.
and the thing about the masks and the social distancing, remember my rule of thumb, okay? There are various studies and they're contradictory.
Hmm.
I think the bulk of the evidence refute the idea that either one of those does anything. But in a situation where there's controversy, you have to look at where the money is coming from, and where there's heavy controversy, you have to discount the whole thing and realize that what it's probably saying is it doesn't work at all. If there's huge controversy in small numbers, especially if they claim that a small statistical percentage is the conclusion of the study, that is, quote, statistically significant at whatever level,
Mm.
that means there are a large number of people studied and it doesn't work very well.
So there is a dark side to the medical industry.
Well, I mean, what I say is you started to quote my introduction. I thought that I was opening a can of worms, but what I found was a dumpster full of worms.
Hmm.
And I've gone into a couple of the specialties. I mean, the psychiatry is particularly egregious, because they certain commentators have said that the amount of money per person they get from big pharma is higher than any other field. The other thing that's true about psychiatry has a large group of people who actually deny their utility altogether, and I'm not just talking about Scientologists. There's a large group of psychologists and other commentators and researchers who think that their whole thing with those medications doesn't work. And basically, what has happened with them is they did studies that didn't include good control groups. A control group is necessary to understand whether something works. They're what's called observational studies. And they essentially soap bubbles. So they do everything based on their judgment, and they use highly toxic and addictive medications, one class of which, called the atypical antipsychotics, decreases lifespan by 10 to 20 years. It's an
My
unbelievable
God.
scene. And those are promiscuously used, especially in the U.S. military, which you have some experience with. Not the drugs, but the military. You had friends that were taking a whole grab bag of medications that were
Yes.
given by the damn psychiatrists. And
Yeah.
these things, they don't go away when you leave the military. You're addicted to the darn things, and it's very hard to get off of them. You have to actually cut the drugs up and do tapering doses over many months and realize that you're going to get anxiety and depression during the period that you're withdrawing from the drug. I mean, it's a terrible, terrible problem. We
So
have just one more thing about psychiatry.
sure.
Since they didn't have adequate control groups, the control or the placebo groups, we don't have any studies from America that show the drugs work. The only control studies we have is from the third world. In the third world, they can't afford the drugs, and so their outcomes are better than ours. Isn't that crazy? In these psych diseases go up and then they go down, right? They wax and wane over the person's lifetime, and they become chronic when you give them the drugs. And our Social Security disability went up in tandem with the drug use, which is suggestive that it was caused by the drug use. It's very suggestive. We've got 17% of the entire populace on anti psych drugs, right? We've got 50 to 70% of the entire populace on prescriptions. It's insane.
So now I'm curious, like, where is the money coming from? Since we with COVID, everything that's being
Good question.
pushed out, where's the money coming from?
Good question. Okay. So we historically have showered money out of the sky on the medical industry. And so what happened, in other words, we gave it to them using third party administrators or insurance company administrators. Now, insurance, as I said, is a layer that sits on top of our entire system and consumes about 20% conservatively of the entire 3.8 or $4 trillion gross. It's an incredible, incredible mistake. And so through these third party, they're called third party administrators, including Medicare and these insurance companies, the money has just flowed freely into healthcare. And it's gone into these pharma companies. Now, Big Pharma is a $1.3 trillion worldwide operation. 50% of the profits, 40 to 50% of the profits are in U.S. alone, which is only 5% of the population of the world. I mean, it's a wild scene. So the money is coming from our federal government and our insurance. And if you make $40,000, you're paying about 10% or $8,000 to $10,000 in healthcare expenses, whether you know it or not, whether it comes out of the company or it comes out of your pocket. It's an incredible thing. I mean, you can barely make ends meet on your $40,000 a year after taxes, and 1/4 of that is healthcare expenses.
So it's interesting information. Are you familiar with the company called QTC?
Well, I don't know anything about them. No.
Okay, and because I was looking at it and I just noticed a correlation within like with the stock market that crashed back in 2008, and then all of a sudden there's a correlation with veterans through their pension. They get switched over to QTC to try to, from my understanding, to eliminate or to downsize. That was happened, and then again recently. And I'm looking at it as an, okay, so that's 2008. Now I see a connection again with COVID, that they're now looking at veterans. So I feel like that's one place, to my understanding, that they're getting money to start to help pay what's going on.
Well, it appears apparent to me that there are heavy connections between the tech companies and pharma.
Yes.
And I mean, obviously these tech companies are enormously wealthy, but pharma, I mean, their profit margins, here's one quick factoid. Healthcare lobbying is bigger I don't think I mentioned this before, but it's bigger than oil, natural gas, banking, and what's the other one? All combined. I mean, they're so wealthy. Pfizer has 40 to 50% profit margins, which is insane. I mean, an average competitive industry has 10% profit margins. So the money is raining out of the sky on these corporations, and they are spending freely to influence anyone they can to produce bigger profits. Their emphasis is to their shareholders and not to patients. And the doctors, hold on, many of us are very idealistic. And I don't want to, we got off track a little bit, but I don't want to claim that all of medicine is useless. There are many, many miracles to be found. There are many caring doctors, and I've got examples of that in my book.
No, that's really interesting. And there's, right now I want to cover as far as how do we, like what are some red flags patients should be aware of when choosing the procedures and medical treatment?
Good question. Okay, so first of all, if you're young and you don't have many problems, many times your best choice is to ignore things unless they're because a lot of what the doctors do is look for billing codes, and they may introduce a cascade of medical services that is expensive and somewhat hazardous and may even produce fatalities. The screening procedures like mammograms and even screening for blood cholesterol, they just don't work very well, and they introduce a lot of medical care that isn't so good. So if you're young, the rule of thumb is try to stay away, get the cheapest health insurance you can.
Yeah.
If you're older, the problems become more complicated, and there are times, many times, when the doctors can do you an awful lot of good. If you need surgery, if you're in pain, if you're symptomatic somehow, you got to see that guy. They're very difficult to judge. And if you have a healthcare background, you have a better chance. If you have a friend with a healthcare background to represent you, if you have one of these complicated problems, you can get a better idea. You want to do your own reading. But the other great thing now is since COVID, we have the ability to go virtually and consult with anyone we want. You can go to Stanford or Harvard or wherever and consult with the best doctors in the country. And believe you me, those guys are smarter than the average bear. They're so competitive there that it's like 100 times more competitive to get into Stanford than it is to get into UCLA. I mean, it's insane. And they not only have good intellectual skills, they have good patient skills and good interpersonal skills. So you'll find they're not all perfect, but you'll find sharp people there. Ever since um, Trump made his executive order that allowed the virtual consultation for all medicine and even initial visits, which I don't think that's been reversed. It's been possible to go anywhere and see anyone for a few $100s. It's not even that expensive. So if you have a bad problem, it's not being resolved by your local guys. Now, everybody in America has the tools to do any kind of medicine. So if you're supervised by a doctor from a Mayo, right, you can have that doctor email your doctor and tell them what to do. And if they don't do it, they're violating a reasonable standard, which is established by the big centers. So that's the answer to your question. You have to be a bit of a detective, and you have to be aggressive, and you have to do a lot of reading yourself if you can.
So what is some sources people can go to learn more about like what's happening, and how can they get a good quality doctor? How can they make sure they're not getting screwed?
Okay, now I'm going to do the pitch here.
Sure.
Right? 500 references, butchered by healthcare, and I've rewritten it, so it's easy to understand, and you can get that on Amazon or wherever books are sold. I've got it on multiple platforms. So that's the first hint, the first blues clue. I would go there and read the summaries, and then you can delve into the references. It's easier to click through using the ebooks, right? Which I just have them all in as links, and it's easy. So, but short of that, the great thing now is the patient blogs. You can go on these if you've got cancer or something else. You can get the truth from the patient blogs. Now, it's not all truth, but you can do a great deal of research without reading the primary medical literature. And these blogs will they've got 5-hour training systems, and you go on. It's all free, and of course, it's all sponsored by big pharma. But that doesn't mean you can't learn something. And so I think it's tremendously valuable. For whatever disease you have, you can go on and you can read about it, and you can talk to real patients, see what's worked for them. Now, I want to make one last pitch for ignoring or downgrading randomized control studies. Clinical experience means a great deal. And if you have someone who's had a lot of experience in your field, and they're good doctors who care about you, they may go off the rails and not recommend some toxic chemotherapy or something else. They may go a different route, and you got to listen to them, but you have to make your own decisions and ultimately take responsibility yourself.
But then,
Hopefully with the help of a nurse or someone. What?
How do we decipher if that's the case, and they're not trying to recommend me to take something else because the doctors themselves are being persuaded for financial gain?
persuasion by financial gain. That's a good way to put it, Greg. It's not that they're evil or not that they're necessarily criminals or anything like that. It's just that the insidious nature of financial incentives is everywhere in medicine now. So trying to sort this out is different for every case. You need to do your research, go to many sources, and try not to be too big a pain in the ass with your doctor. You need to pursue respectful relationships, even if you disagree with them or you lose respect for them. Do not be rude or nasty or pushy. This is not a video with a police officer trying to antagonize them into doing something wrong. You're trying to produce good health effects for you, and everyone has something to offer. And doctors, for all their flaws, have enormous experience. We're given so much responsibility, and most of us are trying as hard as we can to fulfill it.
So, do you have any recommendations towards naturopathic healing?
Okay, so Greg, the thing I would say is what Goldacre said in his book Bad Pharma. This is a quote, and he said, just because there are problems with aircraft design doesn't mean that magic carpets fly. Right? So I think the major strength of naturopaths is they have the capacity sometimes to keep people away from the most toxic traditional therapies. And I was critical for most of my career of naturopaths and nutritionists, but now I have seen how bad ordinary medicine is, how difficult it is to sort out what works and what doesn't. And I'm much less critical of naturopaths. And I also acknowledge that there are many treatments that are off of ordinary mainstream that actually do work, and they're being run down because they're not profitable. You cannot patent bioidentical hormones, for example. And so those things have all been run down by a variety of sources because they're not profitable. I mean, they're only profitable for compounding drugstores, and it's hard for physicians to even make a profit.
Why was it
And
so difficult for like doctors, including yourself, to see that there are benefits in naturopathic healing?
Greg, the thing about being a doctor is it's incredibly consuming. And, at this point, these guys are just, they have one nostril above the water, and they barely can make ends meet and keep up with what they're supposed to be doing. I don't know whether you're aware of this, but the requirements for the documentation now occupy 25 to 50%. It's probably closer to 50% of a doctor's time. In other words, clicking on the computer in order to get paid, they all go home and they screw around with that stuff for hours on end. Now, maybe in HMO systems like Kaiser, it's not so bad, but for the vast majority of doctors who are operating under the current system, they are literally spending nearly 50% of their time messing around with the documentation systems, or they don't get paid. So it's not easy for these guys. They are well trained. It is the most for a large group, and there's 1 million of us in America or something like that. For a large group, it's the best trained, most idealistic, and smartest group we have. I mean, there are smaller groups that are more elite, but for a group this large, it's a very, very impressive bunch of people.
Wow.
They're trying their best, but it's not easy for them. The obstacles thrown in their way. I mean, if you work for an HMO, for example, and you don't prescribe enough statin drugs are a cholesterol drug, right? You don't have a large enough percentage of your patients on statin drugs. Sometimes you get censured, counseled, or even fired. Now, these drugs are not very effective. They're like a $60 billion a year industry in the United States, but they're only less than 5% of the people that are on them really should be taking them because they are somewhat harmful and they don't freaking work for anybody except for the people after a heart attack or with exceedingly high cholesterols.
So with your experience, like what allowed you to arrive to your life philosophy, and how did you arrive at that thought?
Well, life philosophy is another whole issue. But as I said, I kind of got slapped in the head by these shocking events, and I was nearing retirement already. So I decided to start reading, and I looked at one worm at a time, and I couldn't believe it. I finally got around to psychiatry. I had prescribed the SSRI class antidepressants like Prozac for my whole career, thinking they were efficacious. Well, I found out that they cause a lot of violence, suicide. They probably are responsible for a lot of these killings. And I mean, they're phenomenally addictive. You cannot get off the damn things once you've taken them for 5 or 10 years. It's very hard. So, and they're, so I went from one thing to the other, and then I eventually decided to, to write a book about it, and here I am.
Well, let's wrap this up. I got one more question here. If you can explain the Mars on your record in response to the medical licensing and probation.
Well, I think instead of that, I think we've already discussed that, but I think instead of that, I just want to finish with one thing, and that is, don't think that medicine is all bad. 50% of it works, and there are miracles to be held.
Okay, because, I just wanted to understand, because it looks like...
This is routine for anyone who's had a fatality.
Okay. But from what I've gathered, it looks like you broke your probation, from what I'm understanding.
No, I didn't break my probation. I retired. I fulfilled all the probationary requirements.
Okay, because it shows 2 disciplinary actions that are found. Violated terms of probation for 12/1/20, and then there's gross negligence 11/3/2017.
I don't know anything about that. It sounds like allegations, but I didn't break the terms of my...
It's right here in front of us. I'm sharing it. This is the 20. This is 12/1/20, and this is the entire thing right here.
Well, those were the original accusations, as I understand it.
No, because there's definitely
these are definitely a legal process.
Yeah, there's
so
definitely.
Greg, I'm not sure.
This is
public
information
that you've decided to almost convert this into a hit piece, because this is not my primary focus.
What my primary focus is to make sure everybody gets the full scoop on everything, and if we're going to take advice from somebody, we want to make sure that they are actually a good person. And to me, I'm just coming across the reviews. Like, you have great reviews, but then I'm seeing all this information. I mean, exactly, if you can explain to me, like, what happened? Why did you violate it? What were you doing? What was your last medical procedure?
Well, I'm not sure what you're referring to, and I don't think this is
with your probation. With your probation, that's your credibility. Is that the way, or were you forced to retire?
I decided to retire. It was time. The average physician retires at 65.
So what's with your probation? Why did you break it?
Greg, I don't think I'm willing to have this aired. And if you air this, I think that it's a poor reflection on you. I think that
it's live already.
Yeah. It's almost like you're trying to get me to terminate the interview. I mean, since this is live, I mean, I can say whatever I want. I think that you were influenced by my review of your book, which was not favorable. Okay, and then you emailed me back and you said that you weren't even going to interview me, and then you changed your mind and interviewed me. So I think this is like a revenge piece.
No, not at all. I don't remember you even.
My feeling of your book. My feeling after reviewing the book was that it was riddled with usage errors and that it could be tightened up.
I don't really care. I just wrote it just because I wanted to do it for myself. That was for me.
That's fine.
Yeah, so you can say whatever you want. That doesn't bother me.
Right.
But the thing is, like, you broke your probation. You had people's lives in your hands. 2 people died. We don't understand why or what happened, and we feel like you were one of those doctors that we're talking about are part of the corruption. Maybe you had a change of mind and you want to be better, but the first thing you need to do is you need to be vulnerable and be honest with everybody here and now.
Well, I think that someone's credibility is more based on references than it's based on.
No, it's your character. You're not even answering my question.
You can judge me based on what you find in my book.
I'm going to judge you what I found online.
I think you're judging me based on my review of your book.
I don't really care what you left. What I see is these legal probation.
But you were very offended when you text me back.
So now you're going to play this. You're going to make up this story? Show proof to everybody. Show proof that happened.
Look,
because nothing happened.
I haven't accused you of lying. You just accused me of lying.
Well, yeah, so it's right here.
I don't think that that's cool to do in this interview format. So all my best, and go ahead and air it just as it is.
It's already being aired as we speak.
Good work.
Ladies and gentlemen, oh my goodness. Can you believe that? That makes me so mad. Yes. Let's go ahead and just share it since we're already live. Might as well. Let's just put it there. How do I show you guys this? I'm still trying to figure this out. If I put it up here, I think that might be better. There. Yeah, because if we zoom in on this, I'm like, my hands are shaking. I'm so fucking just aggravated that he would just made up something about my book or whatever. Like what are you fucking talking about? But yeah, this is it right here. I'll link this into the show notes. Everybody can see for themselves. Yeah. Don't worry, I'll take my time. I'll see if I can make it bigger for you guys. Get all this crap in the way. Let me see if I can zoom in. Yeah, it's not. Oh, there we go. Much better. Yeah, that's his name. Right there. Oop, shit, sorry. Let me go back. All right, we're back. Shit. All right, let me put that back. Yeah, because it's just like, it's mind blowing to me how how this is going on. Like, this is the shit that I don't like. God, like my hands are shaking because I'm just so frustrated that that individual just mm, 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 mm. The respondent shall not resume the practice of medicine until enrollment of participation in the outstanding portion of clinical competence assessment program has been completed. Interesting. Yeah. I feel like he was on the corrupt side. He was trying to do good, trying to go on a new path, but he won't come to terms with his past, his experiences, his actions. The best thing to do is just be honest. That's all I care about. That's why I do this podcast, is so everybody gets the honest truth, because that's what we're entitled to. It's what we deserve. Now I'm going to just scroll down to the bottom, make sure we got all the information. Yeah, oh yeah. Yeah, so following the effective date of the decision, if responded, ceases practicing due to retirement or health reasons, otherwise unable to satisfy the terms. Yeah. And then we scroll on down. It looks like that's him. Yeah. Yep, I will link that in the show notes. So I think that's about a wrap there. You can come on back. Ladies and gentlemen, that was Robert Yoho. He is an interesting guess. All right. Until next time, thanks for tuning into Your Transformation Station. I am your host, as always, Greg Favaza. You guys stay safe and keep an eye out. There's just a lot of shady things going around.